Hey everybody, this is Blacks in Classical. My name is Ian, and I'm here interviewing Dayvin Hallmon. He is the founder of the Black String Triage Ensemble. He is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he is here to tell us more about himself and the ensemble and his experience as a black person in classical music. Dayvin, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invite. I'm extremely excited. Extremely excited.
Great, awesome. David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm currently 35. I'll be 36 next month. Should I live to see it, God willing. I've been playing music since I was about 4 or 5 years old. I remember being the age of 4 and seeing an orchestra on television and just was impressed by everybody in really freshly pressed tuxedos and really nice evening gowns. And I was impressed by the fact that here's an army of 100 people that can make the sound of everything from a sneeze of a mosquito to the rushing sound of a jet engine of the Concorde and do it on the turn of a dime and do it in unison. And that kind of precision, that kind of emotional force throughout the course of my life was just never lost on me. And it was something that always fascinated me. And I knew at the age of 4, I wanted to be a conductor. They used to give me an unsharpened number 2 pencil and let me conduct the TV.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. Right. That's awesome. So, speaking of being a conductor, I read on your website that you were the assistant um, the assistant concertmaster of the Church of God in Christ International Orchestra for 7 years. How was
Yeah,
that?
which was news to me when I found out. So my stand partner
Wow,
was the
really?
leader of the, was yeah, she was the leader of the first violins, and she was also a member back home of the Delta Symphony Orchestra because she lived in Mississippi. And so she'd known Dr. Johnson, I guess, for a number of years. And after I'd been there a while, she looked over at me and she said, "You know, you're the assistant concertmaster, right?" I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, you're the number two." I said, "Oh, that's news to me."
Wow.
Mind
Just
you,
like that.
because when I met the woman, and I started, I think I was probably only 12 or 13, had just gotten the violin and learned the strings and kind of like where to put my fingers. I played piano since I was 4 years old. I had done clarinet and saxophone since I was 10. So, like, I had musical knowledge and aptitude. I had some understanding of how things function. But the particular thing in my hand at the age of 13 was still relatively new. So when she informed me of that, oh, some 5 or 6 years later, I was quite surprised.
Wow. So at around 20 years old, 21, you were assistant concert master of
Yeah, I mean, it
the
wasn't a
largest
very big string
black
section.
congregation in the United States.
It wasn't a very big string section.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, the Pentecostal church, known for the evolution of the history of the ring shout, prioritizes woodwind and brass players a little more than strings. So you're always outnumbered because there's this woodwind and brass arsenal. You know, there's 80 of them and maybe about 20 of you as string players, which in a symphony orchestra, that ratio would just not stand. It would be the opposite. But that's what we had to work with, so that's what we did.
Now, how did you pull that off? I've been actually I went to at least two convocations and there were mics there, but I mean it looked like they're for props purposes because I could barely hear the orchestra. That how did that work with competing sounds? A gigantic choir, full band, horns, lady screaming at the top of her lungs, lead. How did this work?
Well, the answer to that is about 90% of the time it didn't. Uh, but the truth of it is that there were these
Oh,
moments where, at least during that time period, under Dr. Bernard Johnson's leadership on the instrumental side of the house, and Dr. Ira Stevenson's leadership on the vocal side of the house, that the strings and the orchestra itself were able to actually have a presence and be heard. We were very fortunate with Dr. Ira Stevenson because she was a trained concert pianist. She was a graduate of Oberlin. And so she understood the sensitivities of stringed instruments and string players. I remember we had an arrangement of Richard Smallwood's Total Praise written in C major for the orchestra. And, we we're going to play this in worship. And of course, Dr. Stevenson's leading the choir. And before she gets up there, she looks at the orchestra and she says, we're not doing it in C. We're doing it in D flat. Strings, sorry.
D flat.
She
D
she
flat.
got
Okay.
that. Whereas other people in the vocal world would have not understood how complicated and problematic it was, and certainly wouldn't have given us a chance in our heads to at least think about it and adjust. They'd have just got up there and started leading the choir. So we were really, really blessed to have her while I was part of the Church of God in Christ Orchestra. Her presence, along with Dr. Bernard Johnson, made a world of difference. It really did.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about both of them from Martasca. They're really great people. And as you said, it is good to know that, hey, we're changing the key of the song instead of you starting a half step under everyone. So now, the what inspired you to start the Black String Triage Ensemble?
Oh, there's no one answer. Um, when God tells you to do something, you're never shown the whole picture. You get about 5%, and then you walk that 5%, and God goes, okay, nice job. Here's another 5%. You get a little bit at a time. You don't get shown everything. I remember a street fight had broken out in my county board district in Kenosha. I was elected to county government. Um, and it was a situation where at one house, I guess an adult male said something inappropriate to an underage female at a house across the street, House B, and folks called their relatives and literally just basically almost got to fighting. And a squad rolled up and they had their hand on a shotgun between them. The two officers were getting ready to get out and engage. And it was just seeing people stressed out by poverty, stressed out by racism, stressed out by everyday life situations, frustrations with jobs, and all kinds of other stuff, just really not being able to emotionally process. I think, too, situations like shootings that occur, the idea that no one should have to go to bed with that being the last thing on their minds, that if there's something that we can do musically to help sweep away some of the ashes of that situation, to help unburden people so they can sleep better at night, seemed to be something that made sense to me. It was a question that was dropped in my spirit of what would happen if a bunch of Black and Latinx folks showed up after a shooting and in the immediate aftermath of and played music that was not Bach, was not Beethoven, but was music from Black and Latinx culture to try to actually speak to the people emotionally. And it was a question that just didn't leave me, and one that I continued to wrestle with for about a year or so. I made a visit to the African American Museum of Heritage and Culture in DC with a friend of mine, and we're walking through, and you see Harriet Tubman's hymnal, you see Nat Turner's Bible, Thomas Dorsey's piano. And while I'm walking through the museum, something said to me, address the life condition. And I'm like, what do you mean address the life condition? I've been elected for 10 years. I'm doing everything I can to try to help families not have to struggle, doing everything I can to give voice to the struggles of women, the things happening with LGBTQIS folk, stuff with folks that don't have a lot of money, really working. what do you mean address the life condition? What is it I'm missing? What is it I'm not doing? And I think walking through that museum really helped me see that music, for those of us who are Black Americans and Latinx folks too, that we do it because it is an expression of trying to make it through daily life, whether that's short term or long term, in every single situation, in every single facet. And addressing the life condition means using music to help heal and address some of those wounds. Leaving the museum, when I got back to my hotel room, Oprah was on CBS previewing a journalism piece that she'd been doing about child trauma in Milwaukee, of all places. And she asked two questions. She said, how do we fix the hole in the soul of people? How do we rewire the brain so that people think differently? And I'm standing there watching the TV. I said, well, the answer is music. And then I said it again. The answer is music. And then I said it a third time, got mad because here's Mama Oprah with billions of dollars, everybody in the world at her fingertips practically. And Mama Oprah doesn't see this. How could she miss this? The answer is music. And I called a friend of mine who's just a really dynamite white woman for racial justice and economic justice and gender justice and LGBTQ justice. I said, Jess, this is what I saw on the TV. The answer is music. And she said, well, duh. And so that was the point where I knew what I had to do. And so it was just a matter of being in a place where I could have people and time to be freed up to try to make it happen. And through a series of what looked like unfortunate events at the time, I was finally able to do that. And that's how this got born.
Nice. You went there. So when did you decide to take that leap from the museum and then leave this good government job that we know everyone gets?
It was not a good government job. Trust me on that.
No?
Being a Kenosha County Board Supervisor paid somewhere in the neighborhood of about $650 a month. It was enough so that you could pay for a low-priced studio apartment if you could find one in Kenosha. That's it. I spent many years while being elected where I had no utilities during the summer. Most of the time, I didn't get 3 meals a day because there was just no money for it. I didn't qualify for food stamps. It was right in that gap where you didn't make enough to have 3 meals a day and support yourself, but you made too much to actually qualify for government programs. It was a horrible, miserable existence, but I never stopped working for people. And that was really the push where I realized that Kenosha as a community wasn't improving and wasn't getting anywhere, despite my best efforts. And on the question of race, it was the one thing that everybody in public office ducked and tried to avoid. Anything else I did or brought up, they absolutely loved and were all for it, even the citizens. So that's when it was like, okay, let me see where I can get a job. Couldn't get a job in Kenosha no matter how hard I tried anywhere. So then the search expanded. Well, let's look in Racine. Couldn't find anything in Racine. Let's expand. Let's look in Milwaukee. Couldn't find anything in Milwaukee. I ended up getting a job at a chiropractic office in Waukesha as the office manager. And that was probably about June of 2018. It was difficult to commute between Waukesha and Kenosha. So obviously then I needed to move. So I ended up getting an apartment in Milwaukee, and the chiropractic office sold itself to some conglomerate of some kind in Chicago. My job duties changed. And by October of 2018, the boss said, we understand this is not what you're hired for. We're going to let you go. So I was fired from my job. Not because I was bad. I'd say I was pretty good at it. They had a client list of about 150, 200 people. And for a while, I was managing that office by myself with 2 chiropractic doctors. And so I said, well, Hallmon, you're unemployed. I was only getting $100 a week in unemployment because being in public office does not count towards being unemployed. So $100 a week. And I said, now I have all the time in the world to figure out and recruit players and figure out how to make this happen. And so that was October. I started pounding the pavement. I went to barbershops. I went to hair salons. I went to churches. I went to schools. I went to synagogues and just act because I wasn't born in Milwaukee. I didn't grow up here. When I was in high school, I didn't really hang out here much except to come to the Milwaukee Symphony and then come back home. Um, and so who plays? Who's Black and who's Latinx that plays violin, viola, cello, or upright bass? And I managed to find 6 or 7 people. And January of 2019, we started rehearsals. May of 2019, we had our first annual public open rehearsal so that people could hear the music and experience what it was we were going to do. And then we hit the streets just before June. And by, I want to say, June or July or August, we're on the front page of the Journal Sentinel. So things happened very, very quickly.
That was very, very fast. You know, when you're moving in your purpose, things just move. Yeah. So speaking of that, so you're there where there was violence. Now, were you there where there's, I believe it was August, where the uprising in Kenosha was, where the heavy media presence? Were you there?
We were. We showed up. So Jacob Blake, I believe, was shot on a Sunday by the Kenosha police. And we showed up that Monday evening. Now, mind you, Kenosha had gotten many, many, many warnings that something like that was going to occur. I, for one, on the county board, there are about maybe 6 or 7 different meetings because I went back and looked at video where I had told them, this is a problem. You need to do something. You've got white supremacists in your community. Your law enforcement is hostile. You need to act. Over the summer, I had used a couple of personal days from work and went down to Kenosha to work out and do a couple of other things and take care of some business. And I remember walking back to the train station to get on the bus to come to Milwaukee, and the backside of the public safety building basically faces the train station. And I'm walking down the sidewalk, and there were 2 squads facing one another, and they see me, and one of the squads immediately flips around and takes a surveillance position. And I sent a text message to a buddy of mine on the city council, a friend of mine who's the chief of staff for the state senator that represents Kenosha, and another friend of mine who's the county treasurer. And I said, listen, I'm walking through the backside of the public safety building. This is what just happened. It feels like a combination of a snake pit and a lion's den. I don't know who's doing something down here on racial justice and policing, but they need to hurry up before this gets out of hand. That was about maybe 51 days before Jacob Blake was shot in the back. So we have in the Black String Triage Ensemble currently, we've got 2 or 3 musicians that have ties to Kenosha. One who grew up there, was born there, raised there, graduated from there. Another one who lived there for quite a long time. And so some of our musicians were able to come down. We got help from a group called Legion of the Soul, which is non-Black, non-Latinx allies that want to be helpful in terms of the fight for racial justice as musicians and help give voice to composers of color. And so some of them came down and helped join us. And basically our goal was to try to use music to hold off a riot. Hopefully, we hoped a riot wouldn't occur, another one, but we tried to use our music to hold off whatever violence might occur as long as possible. And I was able to get a message over to the governor's office to say, listen, this is who I am. This is what we do. And we're going to be down there. I understand you have the National Guard on scene. Can they give us an escort? I was told, no, we're glad you're there. Be safe. I sent a message through a friend of mine on the city council to the mayor of Kenosha saying the orchestra is going to be there. We're going to play for as long as we so choose. And when we're done, you need to find a plan for keeping the peace that doesn't involve white men with guns. To which the mayor of Kenosha responded through text, "That's lovely. Tell Supervisor Hallmon the curfew is at 8." Like, okay, you want to be a dick about it? Fine.
And then, yeah.
So we came, we played, and when the situation got too hot, we realized that our work could no longer be of use, and basically left. So a number of a handful of musicians got tear gassed that night, trying to hold off the impending riot.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, yeah, you're trying to do things and it gets blocked, and it's hard to break through that whole system there in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin in general, and and hopefully the music can help. Uh,
Well,
thinking,
there's a difference, I should say. Like, so the Black String Triage Ensemble really prioritizes playing in the immediate aftermath of shootings, right? Legion and doing peacekeeping missions in terms of trying to hold off a riot is an entirely different situation. One is helping people heal in a time of grief and have peace. The other one, relationships have already soured. Our goal is to try to prevent it from getting worse. So peacekeeping missions are very different from a triage concert.
I see. Are you concerned about, say, safety in the future? When things happen, they call the block is hot, and if you're there, you don't know about retaliation. You don't know about people getting emotional, try to attack whoever is there. Are you concerned about safety?
Always. So to answer all those dimensions, when we started doing the triage work, one of the police officers in the Milwaukee Police Department informed me. He said, "I'm really glad you all are out here," because he's a musician as well. He made that known. He said, "Just keep in mind that we have some residual BS that we have to deal with." And I said, "What do you mean by residual BS?" He said, "Even though the scene is secure, people will still shoot at us." I said, "Really? The street will be flooded with cops and somebody's going to want to try to take y'all out." He says, "Yeah, sometimes that happens, so just be aware." It's like, okay, food for thought. We had a couple of one or two scenes that we responded to in the first year where Black folk basically looked at us and said, "You have those instruments. You're not here to play our music. We don't want you." And we're pretty indignant and serious about not wanting us there. So we basically packed up and left. That is the rarity that doesn't usually occur. I always make sure that no matter what it is that we respond to, no matter where we are, that I am hyper vigilant about watching the people at a scene, no matter what it is. I always try to make sure that particularly if it's a shooting, I look to see, is there anybody crying? Is there anybody grieving? Because if it's your loved one that got shot and you just found out, or you just showed up, or you were there when it happened, the last thing that you want is a cello right right in your face. But I still make sure that we are within hearing range of everybody at the scene. So in that way, I try to be respectful, but still make sure that we're there to accomplish what we're there to accomplish. I realize that the trajectory of healing is much longer for people who know the person who was injured or deceased versus everybody else. I'm firmly aware of that. And I've made it clear that the work that triage does, if it's your loved one that has just gotten shot, what we're doing is not necessarily for you. You need something a little more one-on-one and something much more intensive in terms of getting into that situation and dealing with those emotions and all the complications that rise from it. But for everybody else, triage ensemble, I think, is an extraordinarily helpful thing.
Yeah. Now on the site, it also says the five stages of grief, and six is faith. I see that. Um, and do you believe that your upbringing in church, um, and the string ensemble and grief, Do you think that's more of a therapy to the people there?
I look
Some
at
sort
it not so much as a religious
ministry?
question. It's a human question because if it doesn't matter what you have going on, it doesn't matter who or what you do or don't believe in. If you don't think the situation is going to get better, you don't move forward.
Mm, mm, agreed, agreed. Now, I did see also that you were you were it says the musical grandchild of I can't I can't say the name.
Jascha Heifetz.
J.H. and Dr.
Jascha
Thomas.
Heifetz.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So
Thomas
Heifetz,
David and Mattie Moss Clark.
yeah. So Jascha Heifetz was one of the great violin virtuosos of the previous century. And for a time, I was extraordinarily privileged to be a student of his very last protege, Elaine Scroden Foreman. So she's a child of Heifetz. I'm a grandchild of Heifetz. Dr. Bernard Johnson would talk at great length about how helpful and influential Mattie Moss Clark was to him as a musician in terms of understanding vision, in terms of understanding purpose, in terms of understanding how to communicate and to execute and what that meant. And so he spent a great deal of time under her tutelage. So he's a child of Mattie Moss Clark. I'm privileged enough to have worked with him long enough to, I guess I would claim myself a grandchild of Mattie Moss Clark. So, you read Berlioz's memoirs, the French composer,
About the shoes.
and I think there's a line at the beginning where they say, through the spirit of Haydn and the spirit of Beethoven, you've been given this gift in terms of who you followed and who you've studied and who you're connected to. Because we all learn from one another. We all build off of what came from before us. We're just simply another step in this evolutionary moving thing called humanity. And so that's really my way of acknowledging both the Western classical heritage that I have, as well as one deeply rooted in African American gospel music.
Mm. Now, what do you think there is a lack of string players who are black in the classical world and in the orchestra world? Why do we have to go to a black church to see string players?
I don't. I it's odd. Um, so there was a time in American history where we as Black people were the string orchestras, not just in terms of violins and cellos and basses, but banjos and dulcimers and all stringed instruments, really. We're the ones that provided the music on the plantations that the white folks would dance to. That was our role. Look no further than Solomon Northrop in, what is it, 12 Years a Slave.
Yep.
Look no further than the fictional story by Washington Irving of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, where the dance that Brom Bones and Katrina Von Tassel and Ichabod Crane attend, there's a Negro violinist that provides the music. In terms of American history and culture, it has always been us. In terms of having access to it, somewhere that shifted and became an issue of money and access to training and education and all kinds of other stuff. And so I would say in the last 60, 70 years, in some ways, we've gotten shut out. Doesn't mean we don't exist. We do. But I think there needs to be some rallying cry that pulls all of us together. We have a fair amount of Black string players that enjoy being soloists of some kind and have soloist careers. I'm not knocking that, but I think there's an obligation here to really find ways to rally all of us together, bring us together, and show the rest of Black America this is our heritage, this is our culture, this is what we do. And for those of you who think that you can't, or who would like to but don't think that you can too. It's for you. And I think when we begin to really embrace that and accept that challenge and find creative ways of putting that out there, then we'll see the tide start to change. It was interesting coming to Milwaukee because everybody knows Sister Strings. And I had sent them a Facebook message before moving up here talking about the concept of the Black String Triage Ensemble before I'd actually done it. And they had a show at Company Brewing, which was up like a block away from the first apartment that I moved to when I came to Milwaukee, within like 2 weeks of moving in. Honestly, it was really crazy. And so I walk up to him on the street, during the break and introduce myself. Oh, yeah, you said this a thing on Facebook. I said, do you know any other black string players? And they looked at each other and said, we're the only two that we know. And I'm going, I know there's more, because like I knew Miss Artaska, she's from Milwaukee. I knew Byrell Lampkins because I'd met him at UW Parkside. He played violin. He was from Milwaukee. And so it was just this strange problem that we have people, but we've never all been in the same place playing together. And there's never been any sort of rallying cry to pull us all together so that we could really begin to work as a unit. And I think right now that's something that we're ready for. It's something that needs to happen, especially after the death of Elijah McClain in Colorado, who was a string player, who was autistic, and who was an animal lover. There really should be this question in every single Black and Latinx person's mind: what is the next step? People did string vigils all across the country. What is the next step? And I think this is it.
I agree. And it's good to show more of a black face, since there won't be any music in schools. A lot of schools, they're cutting funding, so this is a very, very good. I know in Detroit they have the Sphinx, and that helps too. Uh, have you ever dealt with self doubt and fear with this? This is a tall order. I'm sure you. Is there anything there? How do you get over this self doubt and fear, especially being a black string player? And I'm sure you've had noises and people telling you, "Oh, that won't work." How do you deal with that?
Never ever give in to the haters. If you really feel in your gut that this is what needs to happen and what needs to be done, then just move forward, keep walking. I think maybe there's two stories I have that maybe illustrate this. I brought my violin to church once. This particular occasion, it was Black church, Church of God in Christ Church, and the woman who saw me, this woman, she sees the case and she says, "Oh, what is that?" I said, "It's a violin." She says, "Oh, we don't want that. Get that out of here." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's what I brought, and that's what you're going to hear. Sorry." But see, I think some of that too comes from the fact that I played clarinet, I played saxophone, so it empowered me in ways that I did not see any kind of restrictions. I remember playing a dinner in high school. I went to a private high school, it was a Lutheran high school, and they had an annual dinner as a fundraiser for the school that students were never allowed to attend, but they had heard about me and decided that they wanted entertainment. And so here I was invited to this, fancy shindig of all white people at the country club, no less. And when I came in, I remember one of these parents looking at me and offering me the keys to park their car. And I just looked at them and I said, "I'm sorry, you must have me confused with the valet. My name's David Hallmon. I'm your evening entertainment. The valet's over there. They'll be very glad to help you. Thank you." And I walked up to the tiny white lady who invited me and informed her of what had happened and looked at her and I said, "Don't let that happen again." And she understood. She understood. But I'd done some piano that night. I brought my violin as well. And so I was doing the strolling violin thing between tables. And I get to this one table and there's two white guys, and one of them asked me, he says, "Do you know Devil Went Down to Georgia?" And between you and me, like, of course I know it. Yeah, I know it. I had been in an ensemble and it was one of the things that we'd done over the summer, time and time again. I have it memorized backwards and forwards. but I wanted to mess with him. So I acted like I was kind of maybe didn't know, kind of confused by the question. So he puts money down on the table saying, I bet you don't know it. The other white guy puts money down on the table saying, I bet he does know it. So I kind of messed with the instrument for a second, like I'm trying to figure it out, and then just bust out with the piece cold, completely from start to finish, and took both their money. I mean,
that's how you do it.
Yeah. It's I think I've always been blessed by the feedback from adults, particularly Black adults who say, I used to play back in the day. Where were you when I was younger? If I'd known somebody like you, I'd still be playing. By kids that are really, really, they hear the sound and they go, wow, that's really cool. And then I take the instrument and I say, you want to try? And they go, what? Really? What? And the parents are standing there and the parents are like, well, they might drop it. And I'm like, no. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Let them try. So the fact that the reason that people even want to do this is because they hear something that resonates with them. They hear something that they like, that touches them, that they can identify with, and they want to be a part of it. And so I never, ever, 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 ever forget that. I always make sure that no matter what it is or where it is I'm about to play or do something musical, that before I go to do it, I take a good 10 minutes to just really reassess my own purpose behind why I do music. And I think that's really, really helpful, is just always, always, always remember why you do this. And when you immerse yourself and root yourself in that, it doesn't matter what anybody says to you. I don't need an audience to play. I can play in a room by myself and have a good time. You are not required. You are an extra. You're an essential, but you're also an extra. So in that case, there isn't anything anybody can say to you. There isn't anything that they can do to you. They can't touch you. You know who you are. You know why you are. You know whose you are, and you know what you're called to do, and you understand you need to get the job done.
Yeah. The why is very, very important. There's a book called The Power of Why that even says what you're saying, and it's very important to know why, because there are a lot of voices around, you know. I also like to know, do you think that there is a difference between Black people, uh, or maybe Black church folks, or Black people in general, or white people accepting a stringed instrument, the sound of it?
Yes, in Black hands, yes. It can present different challenges in both arenas. So my high school was predominantly white, and I made it very clear we didn't have an orchestra in my high school. There wasn't one. We had a band, but we had no orchestra. And so and we went through 3 different band directors in the 4 years I was a student, which was rough. And I made it clear to every single one of them, you do a Christmas concert, and then you do a spring concert of some kind. And I made it clear to every single one of them that I will not be playing in the concert band unless you also have me play violin. That's the rule. That's the deal. You don't have very many people in the concert band to begin with. You can't afford to lose anybody. I'm not saying I'm the greatest musician, but I'm not terrible. So you have to comply and meet my demand. You don't have a choice. And they did. And it was always interesting to me to see the faces of white folks from when I had a saxophone to when I had a violin. And then when they talk to you after the concert, wow, I didn't know someone could do both. Well, yeah, it's possible. And so I think there's, if you don't know the history and you're not so intimately acquainted with it in terms of the musical culture all the way back from plantation days, it can be a stretch for you no matter who you are in terms of a Black person with a violin. So it's always a challenge. But I think in terms of Black folks, because it's such a rarity nowadays to see that, if you're doing that live in front of people, you are revolutionizing the world simply by the fact that you are a Black person with a stringed instrument. By default, you are revolutionizing the world because now you are expanding the consciousness of who and what it is that a group of people thinks and sees itself in terms of what it can be.
Right. Another question for you. What are your next plans?
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, what are your next plans?
Next plans. Oh, that's an easy
Yes.
one. So in 2021, at some point, formalizing Legion of the Soul. And what does that mean? That means making sure that they have gear that accommodates their presence at riots. So like goggles, helmets, things like that. Maybe knee pads, elbow pads, and trying to launch the Black Diaspora Orchestra, which would be Milwaukee's Black and Latinx orchestra. And that doesn't mean that every single player is Black and Latinx. It means the majority of the players are Black and Latinx, but it's going to take some Jewish allies. It's going to take some Asian allies. It's going to take some white allies to really help give voice to the things that composers of color have written. And in terms of using that whole orchestra of the Black Diaspora Orchestra, breaking it into smaller chamber ensembles that can then go into the schools and deliver stuff for our kids so our kids can have a sense of the breadth and the depth of history and culture of us as people of color. And also bringing in the music teachers inside the Milwaukee public school system so that they can have something that feeds their soul. Obviously, teaching kids feeds their soul, but the school system as a whole will suck the life right out of you. So we can have something that's artistically engaging and creative enough to help reinvest some of that energy back into our music teachers. And if we can use it as a tool to help recruit people of color who would like to be music teachers or who are to come to Milwaukee and teach in our schools, who understand the trauma that many of our Black and Latinx kids face, who understand teaching from a cultural perspective. It's great to teach children the fundamentals of music, children of color, but they also need to understand, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. They also need to understand Billie Holiday. They also need to understand Duke Ellington. They need to be acquainted with Nina Simone just as much as they are Beyonce and Lizzo. So somebody who gets that at their heart. Can we make Milwaukee an attractive place for them to be, to want to teach in our schools? And can we help support emotionally the ones that are here artistically? And I really feel like that is the goal at the end of the day with the Black Diaspora Orchestra. And for the people who are interested in being music teachers, who are people of color in terms of going to college and wanting to get music degrees, can this be a vehicle that helps them exercise their talents as well? And so that's really what I want to try to get to, is to make that happen.
I see. And also learning about, musical history, knowing Beethoven was mulatto, and things that there were other Black string players who actually did many, many great things before we were born,
Well, I think here's a great example, right? So there's a population of Nigerians that exists in Milwaukee. And there's a composer, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Fela Sowande, who's Nigerian. And I don't know that anybody has really put his music front and center. And he's written for pipe organ, he's written for string orchestra, he's written for choir. We've got people from Sudan, we've got people from Senegal. So, I mean, there's there's also non-Western European instruments from across the diaspora that also need to be put in front of our kids that they can not only hear, but touch and see and experience and know the history of. And I think that's really important, is bringing all of these pieces together, bringing all of these pieces together.
Yeah, I agree. It'll make them more into it than when they see themselves in the music. You know. Also, now with the diaspora, many of us came through the diaspora. Do you think Latinx would dilute your message
No,
having that in
no, no. And here's why. And and I'm really excited by that question. Um, so the one thing that unites every single human being on the planet is this. It is the heartbeat. Not because we all have it, but because no matter how you came into the world, whether you're conscious of it or not, it is the first thing that you hear. And so you look at something like Dia de los Muertos, which is, in terms of Latin culture, celebrated across the world. The most significant aspect of that is the drum because it represents life. It helps, it is the heartbeat of the spirit. Well, where in the hell did that come from? Africa, Africans, so this connection, Afro Latinx folks, is very much rooted in rhythm. And so I think putting that front and center and exploring that and what that means and all of its various iterations is extraordinarily important. And so we have to get to a point where we see one another as kinfolk. Because when you look at the data in terms of healthcare, housing, education, economics, whatever, you name it, in terms of Black Americans, Latinx folks run parallel to that as well. And they feel similarly about the police as we feel similarly about the police. I remember having a conversation with a member of the sheriff's department, and she does community relations. And she's Latinx. And she said, David, we have the same problems with the Latinx community not wanting to talk to us as Latinx officers that the Black officers have with the Black community not wanting to talk to them. I'm like, go figure. Go figure. We are kinfolk. And we as Black folks have to stop thinking that the Latinos are some here to replace us and to take over. And the Latin folks have to stop thinking that we're lazy, unmotivated, and not capable. There are these myths that run rampant in these circles about the other, and neither of them are true. At the end of the day, it's the white man pulling the strings that controls everything. Everything. And we have to put that to bed. We have to put that to bed. These are our kinfolk, and we need to really uplift that and really express that. And I think music is a really beautiful way to pull all of those ties together.
Do you think they feel the same way?
I would say this. So, y'all speak Spanish. Why do y'all speak Spanish? Because a dude named Christopher Columbus landed in Puerto Rico, who, I mean, he was Italian, but it was Spain that paid for the voyage. The Italians don't like Christopher Columbus so much. They really don't. Not the ones in Italy. The ones in America are on something, trying to claim him as their guy. But over in the home country of Italia, no, they don't have a Columbus Day. They didn't give him the money. Spain gave him the money. And what did Queen Isabella say? He said, can I take slaves? She said, only if you make them Christian. And so he went, and indigenous folks in terms of Latin America, I mean, North America and South America. Why are they even named America? Because a guy named Amerigo Vespucci wrote his name on the map. He wasn't even in charge of the expedition and just signed himself right on it. And it stuck, So it isn't so much about whether everybody sees it. I think there's enough that do, and I think musically we can really express that and push that. And there's fertile ground there's fertile ground to have a conversation. There's enough material to have it with, and it shouldn't be too hard for us to embark on a journey together. And now is the time. Now is the time more than ever.
What piece of advice would you give a string player coming up?
That depends on how old the person is. I would say the music is challenging, but the work is rewarding. The connection that you make in terms of reaching people is rewarding. The insight that you will gain into learning why composers wrote what they wrote, the thrill, the euphoric joy that you will get in terms of reinterpreting and exploring things that are out there by making your own, string covers of various stuff. There's no end to the creativity that you can use to express an idea. And I would say cherish it, love it, harness it, and remember that you'll always have to work to try to perfect it. And it will never be perfected until you are 6 feet under, because then you're done. Once that happens, there's nothing else. It is a lifelong journey. But don't let that scare you. Let it empower you. Let it thrill you. Celebrate every moment, and don't let anybody tell you no, and keep working. Keep working. Keep working. You may not get it today, but you never know what tomorrow will bring, or next week.
All right. Well, where can people find you? That's a great message. Where can people find you? Follow you.
I would say Facebook and Twitter.
At Dayvin Hallmon.
Twitter at Black String Triage, BLK String Triage, all one word. Facebook, you can follow the Black String Triage Ensemble and or the Black Diaspora Orchestra, or you can add me. Although my personal stuff, I really don't. Occasionally say some music stuff, but there's other things roped in there too, so that may not be as interesting.
Everybody, this is Dayvin Hallmon, the founder of Black String Triage from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You can follow him on all his social media. Please keep in contact with him. Make sure you guys follow him. He's up to some great things. Thank you, Dayvin, for this interview.
Thank you for the invite. Please, please, please stay healthy, stay well. We need as many people as possible when this pandemic is over to still be with us on Earth. We have much work to do for one another, and we can't do that if we lose you. So stay healthy.
Blacks in Classical, everybody. Dayvin Hall, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hallmon. Sorry.
It's all right.
Good night.